So I think from an early age, I describe it as I come from a long line of Bolshie women. So Marjorie Maud, my grandmother on my maternal side, and Alice, my grandmother on my paternal side, and certainly my mother, were very strong characters.
Joining us on today's episode, we have the Honourable Sue Ellery MLC. Sue is the Minister for Finance, Commerce and Women's Interest here in Western Australia. So, Minister Ellery, we'd love for our listeners to, given this podcast is all about understanding you some real and raw insights, we'd love if you could just share with our listeners a little bit more about who is Sue Ellery.
Sure. So, 62-year-old woman in my last term in the Parliament of Western Australia. When I finish next year, after the state election, I'll have been a Member of Parliament for 24 years. So that's been a big defining part of my life. Married to Peter, we have a dog, Murphy, and living a life.
Awesome. Thank you.
I love the dog. I'm a big dog person. Can you define for me, in your words, what gender equity is and why it's important in society today?
Sure. I think in its simplest terms, it's about fairness. And you have to start from the premise, well, why do we need to talk about gender equity at all? And that's because we're coming from a place of unfairness, where there is, I guess, in a general sense, more opportunities for boys and men, greater range of options when it comes to working and income and economic kind of safety, if you like, and less opportunities for girls and women. So seeking gender equity is about trying to get a bit more fairness into the system. So whatever metric you choose to use, whether it's economic status, health and well-being, whatever metric you choose, that it's fair. It recognises, I think, that there are different biological situations, and it's not about saying everything should be equal all of the time. It's just about recognising what is fair, taking into account it's the women that have the babies, for example. So that has an impact on women's participation in the workforce and what they need when they return to the workforce. It's not about everything being exactly equal all of the time. It's about recognising that for a whole range of economic and cultural reasons, it's not been equitable, and what do we need to do to adjust that?
Yes.
So true. I was at a event just yesterday, and one of the guests was talking about their children were in like competitive rowing, and the boys were given the summer season for training, and the girls were given the winter season for training. And it's like even something as seemingly small as that actually is hugely unfair. Who wants to get up at 5:30 and go down to the Swan River in the middle of winter?
Yeah,
right.
And I remember talking to women in sports organisations, and they were talking about, there's been amazing changes and great opportunities for girls and women in sport now, but even the timetabling of the use of grounds, for example. It's still the case in lots of sports that the women's teams get the very early morning listings use or the middle of the day, and it's the male teams that kind of get the prime use of the sports ovals, for example. And things like, having changing rooms for girls at sports ovals so that girls are not having to change in the car or kind of between car doors or whatever. Things like that are slowly changing, but there's a lot more to do.
100%. And you'd think almost some of those are just like basic like human rights kind of things, wouldn't you? But the reality is that we're still in a place where some of those things aren't available, and women are still breastfeeding in cars in the car park on their lunch break because there's no facilities. It's like some of the basic low-hanging fruit that we've got here, we still don't have right here in Australia today.
Yeah, there is lots of work to do, but I think we can't lose sight of the fact that lots of work has been done. I've been in the public policy space, as I said, it'll be 24 years when I finish in Parliament, and I've seen changes in that time. So I think sometimes we beat ourselves up and don't take the time to kind of look back and reflect at the changes that have happened. They're great, but of course we need to do more.
And just for the sake of our listeners, am I right in saying that, I can't remember how long ago, but if a woman worked for the government and like either got married or fell pregnant, you lost your job? Is that
That's
right?
correct. You had to resign.
Yeah.
So if you're working in the public sector, you're testing my memory, it's certainly before my time, but I think it might have been as late as the early 1970s, maybe. We'd have to fact check. But it was the case that you'd have to resign once you got married. Never mind once you had kids, but once you got married.
Wow. So yeah, you're right. Like whilst there's still a long way to go, like far out, coming from that
there's been some large leaps.
Is huge
along the way, but still more work to be done.
100%. And so, was there a defining moment or experience in your career, either pre-government or post, which really ignited your passion for gender equity?
I would have to say it was way before I entered the workforce. So I went to an all-girls Catholic school here in Perth, and we had the year above us, the girls entered a TV quiz competition for schools. It was called It's Academic, and it was quite prestigious. And the year above me, so I think they must have been year 9s, they won the state competition, and they won a computer. Which this was back in the mid-70s, and the computer was probably bigger than the room we're in today. It was massive. We were about to go co-ed with the boys' Catholic school down the road. It was to be a staged sort of transition, and the powers that be decided that computer should go to the boys' school. Wow. And I remember going home from school saying to my mum, I don't understand how this could possibly be fair. And she started to talk to me about, well, sometimes in this world, girls don't always get, what they are treated fairly. So from that moment, I was like, no, this is not right. And I want to kind of know more about this. And I would have to say that was the point at which I then went on to be active at university and the like after that.
Oh, that's amazing. And I like hearing those stories because it really shows like you found your purpose really early in your life, and that's really steered you in that kind of direction. I always like asking a little deeper questions. I want to know about if you had any role models or anybody that inspired you in shaping your understanding of gender equity, and how did they impact you?
Sure. So I think from an early age, I describe it as I come from a long line of Bolshoi women. So Marjorie Maud, my grandmother on my maternal side, and Alice, my grandmother on my paternal side, and certainly my mother, were very strong characters, very strong characters. And my mum she'd wanted to go on to school and she'd wanted to go and study in the US, but her dad made the decision that she should leave school at 14, so that's what she did. So she was determined that if she had a daughter, that education would feature really highly, because she knew that was the way to set someone up for success into the future. So she was determined to give me, and to be fair, my two brothers, every opportunity in that she could. So she worked really hard for that. So that was the beginning, and certainly my two grandmothers, although Alice died when I was quite young, but I certainly remember her as a strong personality. And then at school I had some great female teachers. At university there were some fantastic women my age involved in student politics, and I was involved in student politics when I was at university. And then in my working life, so I worked predominantly in trade unions, advocating and representing the interests of low-paid workers for the most part. And there were a number of women in that space who were fantastic role models. Helen Creed was one. She was the Secretary of the Union, and Cheryl Davenport, who was a Member of Parliament. I took her seat when she retired, and Cheryl was one of the key women in leading the changes to abortion laws in Western Australia in the 1990s.
Nice.
Amazing, thank you. And through our contact with yourself and your office, we're privy to some of the amazing work and policy work that your government has done to advance gender equity in Western Australia. But for the purpose of our listeners who are not privy to that, can you highlight maybe a couple of the main policy projects or initiatives which your government has led, which you're most proud of?
Yeah, so there's been a whole lot, because we went to the election in 2017 with a range of policy commitments. One of those, which is about setting up role models and providing opportunities for women to lead, was that we would ensure that of government boards, 50% of their membership were women. Now, what that took was leadership at the top to make it happen. The way that board appointments are made is that the relevant minister has to make a submission to Cabinet, and Mark McGowan, as the Premier of the day, determined what went on the agenda for every Cabinet meeting, and he just made it perfectly clear. Don't put up a Cabinet appointment, a board appointment, unless it is addressing the issue of gender equity or it demonstrates you've got a plan. Some ministers kind of balked about that, kind of complaining that they couldn't find women with particular technical expertise. That's quite short-sighted, because, of course, boards need all sorts of skills and expertise, so that was an important one. The other one is around the area of procurement. That's a big part of what I do now as Minister for Finance. So that is people seeking to do business with government, whether it's providing government with equipment, pens, medical equipment, the whole lot, through to procuring construction of schools and hospitals and the like. And under the previous Minister for Women's Interests and the previous Minister for Finance, they put in place a procurement project to require companies seeking to do business with government and to get government contracts to provide to us the information they have to provide at a federal level through WGEA about what policies and procedures they have in place for gender equity. We asked them to provide that to us if they wanted to be successful in getting government contracts. Over 500 contracts have been signed, over $680 million worth of contracts have been signed. Sky didn't fall down. It was not asking people to provide more information. And it's been highly successful, and it will be expanded. That's just a couple. There've been, so much, whether it's respectful relationships in schools, whether it's period products in schools and TAFEs. There's a whole range of measures that we put in place.
Awesome, thank you.
That's amazing. And just based off of that, the experience that you have and all of these things that are happening, what's the most rewarding aspect for you in really advocating gender equity?
I don't know that there's a single point where I can say, well, that is satisfying to me. I do think seeing the number of younger women coming up through politics and into Parliament has been amazing. We're now at over 50% in the Legislative Assembly. We've been over 50% for some time in the Legislative Council, which is the chamber that I'm in. That it's great to see that more and more women are seeking to play a role in that space, and I think that's because very gradually over time they've become a bit more gender friendly.
That's good. I like that.
So, I'm sure it's not all been smooth sailing on your, road to advocacy for gender equity. So, can you share an experience or a couple of experiences when you faced adversity in your advocacy efforts, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I can't think of one particular instance that stands out, but I've taken the view. I'm a member of, what's a broad church, the Labor Party. It's a mainstream political party. That means compromises have to be made along the way. In Western Australia, we're generally viewed as a conservative, small c, leaning state. So, sometimes policy change hasn't happened maybe as quickly as I would have liked. Some of the big changes that we've done, the most recent changes led by my colleague Amber Jade Sanderson around abortion law reform, for example, our party still has a conscience vote on that issue. So trying to work out whether or not we would actually get it through the parliament, that was challenging. In the end, it was an overwhelming majority of people from all parties who supported the change, but you don't know what the outcome's going to be till you actually kind of jump in and try and do it. And like I said, change hasn't always happened as quickly as I might have liked, but I take the view that I want to be where I can exercise influence and see results, and that for me can only be in a mainstream political party, without getting too kind of overtly party political about this, but you can take a purist position and be a member of one of the minor parties and you will never influence the outcome because you won't be part of government. And I want to influence the outcome and I want to see outcomes. That means you need to be in one of the parties that forms government. And so that means you compromise along the way. But I mean, I think that's life. You whatever field you're in, you need to work to influence the mainstream and to achieve what you want to achieve. That's not to diminish the role that minor parties play or others play, because you constantly need people to be kind of pushing at the edges, expanding the envelope. But I do think if you want to see real change happen in your time, in your profession, then you need to be in the mainstream trying to influence that.
It's a really good practical point, isn't it?
Yeah.
And look, one of the things that we are hearing from members of CEOs for gender equity at the minute is that because, I guess the profile of the topic of gender equity has gone so high, so fast in the last few years, that a lot of our members are kind of grappling with a little bit of resistance, especially from a male perspective. So, have you experienced that? And if so, any advice on how to best handle that?
I think probably the best advice I can give is just don't give up. Change does happen. And if you start to lose sight of that, then just take a moment and look back at history, because change does happen. I don't know that I can think of one kind of silver bullet to make people kind of keep going, but I do think you never give up. Whatever it is that you're pursuing, don't give up. Seek advice, change tack, take time back, reflect, and then come back at it in a different way, but never give up.
Good call.
And I think the younger generation is moving in that direction as well. They're seeing things and they're calling things out, and they want that progression to happen. So they're going to keep going, and they're going. What based off of that, what do you see as a forecast of what accelerating gender equity and what it's going to look like later on in the future?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the key things is when we start to value the kind of caring professions using the same economic metrics that we use to allocate to someone who works in the resource industry and digs things out of the ground.
Yeah,
so when we say that the people who look after children in childcare and the people who look after the vulnerable in aged care are worth as much to us, if not more, than people working in resources digging things out of the ground, then I think we will be way down the track to actual gender equity in this country. Now, there have been fantastic, significant moves in that direction. I never thought I would see the day when Treasury officials were actually talking about women's participation in the workforce and childcare as key economic issues, but they are. I talked about childcare and aged care in my first speech in Parliament, and there were always things on the edge. They were always women's issues. They were not centre of the economic debate. Well, in 2024 they are. And so that's good.
Yeah.
We haven't cracked it. We haven't adjusted those yet. and that doesn't mean that we diminish the take-home pay of people working in the resource industry, because we need them. But it does mean we need to place greater value and therefore reward with greater pay those people looking after the most vulnerable, whether that's, babies and small children or people in aged care.
I totally agree.
And I mean, I think the point needs to be made for those who haven't realised it. The majority of the workforce in childcare and aged care are women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
And we kind of need to change that as well, don't we? Like, we need to, gender equity is, part of gender equity is kind of representing the communities that you serve. And, the population of Western Australia is roughly 50-50. So I'd love to see more, getting more men's engagement in those industries and in those roles, because, like a female dominated, executive team or a board or is actually no good, just the way male dominated is no good, because it's groupthink. And so you don't have that diversity and kind of challenging each other, and you have to think deeper and, articulate yourself better, which ultimately leads to better outcomes. So yeah, we would love to do some work around that at CEOs for Gender Equity, as to how we actually engage more men, which might help the overall cause of increasing the profile and the importance of these industries. But we've got a little way to go there.
Changing the stereotype, really.
Yeah. And it's kind of the same advice as getting more women into mining. It's like, where's the role models and the stories of the potential impact and the amazing experiences that you can have and the meaning behind it, so I think there's some opportunities there for us. So I'd like to ask, because of the profile going so high so far, I think especially people who aren't involved from like in their work or in government with this topic, like people just average people at home in Western Australia, I'm kind of hearing from these people that they're, I guess they get the topic, they get the intent of gender equity, but they're kind of feeling overwhelmed or unaware of what they can actually do themselves in their everyday lives to contribute to the cause. So do you have any advice for people from that perspective?
So I think those people want the best for their family. They want the best opportunities for their kids. If their girls want to play soccer, they want their girls to be able to play soccer and not have to get changed in the car, like we were talking about before. So for those people who, I represent in my electorate, it's about providing role models themselves, which they do every day. And it's about challenging stereotypes, I guess, and having conversations the same way that my mum had conversations with me when I went home from school and said, I don't understand how the boys' school got that computer. It was the girls that won it. It's having those conversations, and I think there are plenty of families that are doing that, and we can all, make our own contribution and challenge how we do things ourselves and how we make decisions in our household and who does what in our household, and making sure that we provide opportunities for girls and boys.
I extremely agree with that. And just with your experience and 20 plus years in this, so what's next for you?
Well, a little less pressure, a little less worrying about what's on the front page of the paper every day.
'Cause it's you time now.
So I don't want to. I don't think I can go from kind of 100 to 0. So I want to do some stuff that keeps me occupied. I guess about the equivalent of 2 or 3 days a week. Okay. I want to do some stuff in the creative space as well, because I really haven't had time to do that. So I like to write, so I want to write a bit.
Nice. Is it poems or
no,
just short stories, novels?
Crime novels.
All right.
Sign me up.
So the crime novel set in Parliament, I'd love to.
Nice.
I've started writing, tiny bit, but so I'd like to play with that. I'm not thinking that I'm going to write, the great novel that will get published and make me gazillions of dollars. I feel like we can
do a TV show there. I feel like there's a Netflix series or a movie right there.
Great. Yeah. Probably watch a bit more Netflix. That would be good. I seriously got into Bridgerton when I had COVID recently, so I had to have some time off. So
I've been hearing so much about that.
you haven't watched
I haven't
Oh,
watched
Henry.
that. But I've
Seriously?
had
Yourself a
so many
favor.
people that have told me, they're like, "Oh, this new season, there's a guy that looks like you." I was like, "Wait, what?" So I'm
there's
like,
lots of guys that looks like you in that show. Actually,
I'm like, I have no idea what anybody's talking about, but I'm
I
gonna have
can't
to check
unsee
it
it now.
out. I have to check it out now.
Yeah.
I have to. It was so more Bridgerton, more Netflix.
Yeah,
Anything
yeah.
else?
Probably I spend a bit more time in Broome.
Okay.
We love going to Broome. We've got a little place up there, so probably a bit more time there.
Nice.
You know, I'm interested in boards, perhaps being on some boards, and I think I've got the opportunity to give back. So I'll pick a not-for-profit that might be interested in what I
nice.
can bring to the table, and then something else that kind of challenges me intellectually and pays me a little bit as well.
Yeah, nice.
Sounds good.
Love the crime novels. I'm a big fan as well.
Mm.
So
Love it. So look, you don't have obviously. So next year is you'll be finishing up. Is there anything you'd love to kind of get over the line before you do so?
There's some legislation that we're working on in my portfolio. So they're not necessarily related directly to gender, but retirement villages is one of those. So so there's some bits of legislation that I want to finish, and be in a position to hand over to the next generation.
Awesome. Thank you. So just one final kind of question for you, Sue. What's maybe one key takeaway for our listeners that would help accelerate gender equity in Western Australia?
Wow, that is a really hard question to answer. I guess the one thing that everyone can do is think about what is it that you're doing to send a message to, I don't know, let's say a 9-year-old girl looking at what you're doing. What is the message that you're sending to her? And if the message that you're sending to her is girls can do anything, well, then that's setting the next generation on the path to gender equity. So we can all do that. In a kind of corporate sense, in a company sense, leadership matters, and actually achieving a culture in your workplace or in your organisation that values gender equity, that comes from the top. And that means that you have to make deliberate, considered decisions about how you structure your organisation, what opportunities you provide for your workforce.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Yeah.
I've absolutely just loved this conversation, and I think your mother and your grandmothers obviously really, set you up for success and nurtured that spark that is obviously in the genetics somewhere. So we're grateful, and we're grateful for all the support that you've given us at CEOs for Gender Equity, and now we've been able to obviously capture and share some of those amazing insights with our listeners. So we're so grateful for your time, and really look forward to seeing what you get up to next.
Great.
Yeah,
thank you
so
for the
much.
opportunity, and thank you for the chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So that concludes another episode of Voices of Gender Equity, or the real and raw stories of impact.
We hope this conversation has revealed new insights, sparked a passion, and inspired you to drive meaningful change towards gender equity.
And just remember, change begins with each and every one of us. So until next time, keep raising your voice, keep championing equity, and keep making a difference no matter where you may be listening from.
This is your host, Ash McGrath,
And Henry Cooper.
signing off from another episode of Voices of Gender Equity, real and raw stories of impact.